What's up guys, Hello for Football Talk here. It's that time of the year, fantasy football season is upon us, and this video has become an annual tradition where I outline some of our favorite picks based on where they usually come off the board in drafts. I'm not a fancy analyst, I'm not going to claim that I've been grinding best ball drafts all summer long or anything like that, but there's a reason I know my league mates every year by somehow finding these gems and competing for titles. Let's quickly look at last year, when I told you that Derrick Henry had no place at the back of the second round, and he finished as the RB2, Chase Brown was the RB11 despite going in double-digit rounds, Brian Thomas Jr. was the 4th-ranked wide receiver as a rookie sensation in the same range, and Khalil Shakir was a useful flex play at the very least despite barely getting drafted. Geno Smith also brought in solid returns despite issues with Seattle's offense overall, while a couple of other players I recommended unfortunately got hurt. What we'll do here is go through 2 quarterbacks, 3 running backs and wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and then a couple of defenses alike. I'll provide consensus rankings from 4for4 Fantasy, who collected data from a bunch of the main platforms, where I chose half PPR scoring between NFL.com, ESPN, Yahoo and Sleeper. To me that's the superior scoring format, but you can adjust these thoughts to how your league operates based on the cases I lay out here. I will try to mention if I like players better for certain formats, but those were the guidelines by which I put this list together. And please keep in mind that I'm recording this on August 11th already this year, since I was asked before to get them out a little bit earlier, meaning they inherently will still change slightly based on the majority of drafts still coming up, and the potential for injuries in the preseason. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen. I will get to all the names here in just a moment, but let me quickly ask you that if you find this information useful, to please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing if this is your first time on the channel. I release either a video or written piece over at hellofootballtalk.com every week, all the way throughout the season, and they oftentimes contain meaningful fantasy info as well. But now let's kick things off with the quarterbacks, and the first name up here is Justin Fields of the New York Jets. Right now going as the QB12, just inside the top 100, I have him up as QB8, 75th overall, and this is simply about the disconnect between how good of a quarterback people perceive Fields to be in a general sense, and his value as a fantasy asset. The Jets are now the 3rd spot at which he's gotten the chance to start. I would say that his final season in Chicago got fans excited about a future with him, and they only traded him because they had the 1st overall pick from Carolina in the back pocket, and Caleb Williams was available. While last year, Fields led the Steelers to a 4-2 record with 10 touchdowns accounted for compared to only 1 interception, before Russell Wilson got his job back when healthy. At least good enough for the Jets to hand him a 2-year $40 million contract and not bring in any other quarterback outside of an undrafted free agent after parting ways with Aaron Rodgers. Lamar Jackson has the all-time single-season rushing record for a quarterback from 2019 at just over 1,200. Do you know a second? Justin Fields in 2022 with about 60 less, and he reached the end zone 8 times that year himself. 63% of that yardage actually came on scrambles, however, and there's a good chance this will be the best offensive line and potentially run game overall with the Jets that he's had, as they drafted Armand Membu inside the top 10 to pair with Olaf Ashano as one of the most promising tackle tandems in the league, while the interior should hopefully be healthy. We've yet to see what this offense looks like exactly, and the first-year coordinator Tanner Engstrand, but coming over from Detroit as their former passing game coordinator, there's a lot of promise for the varied ideas we might see from them, which might let things run through their strength up front. As a passer, Fields has never quite been able to calibrate throws that require more touch and sped up his internal clock to exhaust progressions. However, he's always been a promising vertical passer who will give Garrett Wilson opportunities to show off his ball skills on the field. I understand that they're lacking a reliable number 2 receiver, but 2nd-round pick Mason Taylor is a pro-ready target in the short to intermediate range, with they can detach from the formation and lighten box counts for the design QB run game. Fields averaged 19 points per game across the 6 starts in Pittsburgh last year, which would have been good for QB9 if you extrapolate those over a full season. That alone would more than pay off for his ADP, but this should be a significantly better offensive line he's playing behind now, as long as they can stay healthy. Many people may look at dual threats as hypes up gambles, but here the rushing could actually provide a solid floor, where if they get a big play by one of these ancillary receivers they picked in the middle rounds these last couple of years, Fields banks easy points on like a screen alert or a fly sweep. Fields is so easy to pair with what you might label a safer pocket passer, and has the upside of finishing as QB5 behind the largely accepted top tier. The other signal call I want to discuss here is Drake May heading into his 2nd season with the New England Patriots, currently going as QB18, 137th overall. I have him behind Fields as my QB9, 86th overall. This is one of 3 players on this list who also wrote about extensively as second and third breakout candidates at the start of July. If you want to read more on them, May was my clear-cut QB2 in the 2024 draft class, which had a record-breaking 6 guys at the position selected in the top 12. And even though Jaden Daniels had a sensational Offensive Rookie of the Year campaign, is now firmly inside the top 4 selected in fantasy drafts, I believe the name that came off the board right behind him is being overlooked. Now, on a more basic level, I do believe that people are paying attention to what the Pats are doing, considering all the changes they made this offseason, bringing in a new coaching staff like Mike Rabel, spending the highest amount of total guarantees of free agents at nearly $200 million, and using all of the picks in the draft that they came into with the highest resources if you weight them accordingly. There's a chance Michael Onwenu, who has been the best guy up front, might be the only remaining starter on the O-line without losing any meaningful names. They're retaining all 6 players who were targeted 30 plus times last season, yet only 2 of them might actually start in 11 personnel, plus they added a dynamic running back and wide receiver on day 2 of the draft. Maybe most importantly for May, they brought back Josh McDaniels, who in 13 seasons with the Patriots only coordinated one offense that finished outside the top 8 league-wide in scoring, and top 3 more often than not. Obviously we all know that was heavily connected to the quarterback throughout the time, but he's consistently stayed ahead of the curve, has repeatedly shown his adaptability throughout different iterations of those offenses, turned rookie Mac Jones into a Pro Bowler, and this may be the most physically talented quarterback he's ever worked with. I'm particularly excited about how third round pick Kyle Williams might open up the offense with his speed, all the option and pivot routes from receiving Stephon Diggs, run for easy completions, and how Josh may tap into the Cam Newton portion of the playbook that he flashed in 2020 when he ran for about 600 yards and 12 touchdowns as a weapon on the goal line. From week 6 through 17, when he became the starter in New England, Drake averaged 16.8 points per game, which would have been good for QB15 last year, so if he just returns that exact level, he's already paying off that investment. Now we're looking at an improved O-line by all indications, addition by subtraction by just the receivers that they won't have to put on the field this year, while having guys in store that could at least make them an average pass catching group, significantly more opportunities as a designed rusher when he had over 400 yards scrambling across 12 starts last year alone, and the opportunity to grow as a still young player and are one of the most proven play callers in the entire league. And you're spending like a 12-13 round pick on him. I do want to throw out 3 more names here, the first one being Michael Penix Jr. of the Falcons. So if we look at what he did in very limited time as a rookie, Penix scored 7.4, 12.2, and 26 points in 3 starts, and what's not included there is Kyle Pitts dropping a surefire touchdown against the Giants, which ended up in the hands of a defender instead. That guy's one of 3 former top 10 picks along the skill position group. They bring back all but one starter in the O-line, stability offensive coordinator, and our full offseason is the unquestioned starter for what could be an explosive attack when you look at the vertical prowess the quarterback displayed in college. Cam Ward's of the Titans, the most overlooked or under-discussed first overall picks I can ever remember. I thought this guy had legit difference-making potential as a franchise quarterback. He is at the very least a competent play caller. They kind of reshuffled the O-line in a meaningful way that puts everyone in the best spots, adding Tyler Lockett and some promising mid-round rookies, and even his go-to guy at Miami at least as an undrafted free agent. At minimum, someone to keep an eye on as a spot starter potentially. And finally, Anthony Richardson of the Colts, the best upside swing you can make at the very end of your drafts. Obviously not someone you should be relying upon to any real capacity, but after going as one of the first 6 quarterbacks last year, you're taking him over pure handcuff running backs and players of that quality. Through 3.5 games as a rookie, this guy was on pace for QB2 points per game, and then even for as up and down as last year was, he was tied for 17th in that regard, while showing growth after being benched, and now seemingly having approached the offseason with a different working mindset. Let's now move on to the running backs, and this first name here is pretty well accomplished in the fantasy space and in the NFL altogether, and that is Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts, who's currently going as RB9, 19th overall. I have him a couple of spots higher in my RB rankings, and as a fringe first round candidate. Even though we have seen the top running backs receive more of the spotlight as of recent, people generally, and especially the fantasy community, is quick to forget or at least overlook guys at the position when they suffer a major injury, have a down year, or just reach a certain age. I mean, this guy was the 101 across all leagues and formats just 3 years ago. That was after racking up just under 2,200 scrimmage yards and 20 touchdowns the season prior, with Carson Wentz handing him the football. For the next 2 years, he missed time due to contact, discussions, a broken hand, and a couple of high ankle sprains. Now, you'd like for him to have been out there, but he's never had really any structural damage from an injury. he'll still only be 26 years old when week 1 rolls around, and this offense has the potential to be as good as it's ever been since he was drafted. Just last year, Taylor averaged just over 100 yards rushing and right at a touchdown per game. Despite missing 3 weeks after the opening month, he became someone who powered his fantasy owners to playoff runs, scoring 39.8 and then 27.6 half PPR points in week 16 and 17 when needed most. So while some people will remember what he did for them down the stretch, as do I, since he nearly cost me a title on the opposing team, plenty of people had him on the roster for largely meaningless games as well, since it took about half the fantasy season for him to really pay off their investments. This guy can still break off explosive runs. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs were actually tied atop the league with 25 carries of 15 plus yards. Taylor was the next team up with 17, and he actually missed those 3 weeks. Sure, the offensive line is replacing the starters at center and right guard, but that was already the case for more of last season than not, which day 3 rookie Tanner Bololini filled it admirably up the pivot. Meanwhile, this year's first round Tyler Warren may not be a badass run blocking wide tight end yet, but he's going to further diversify the run game with him lining up in the backfield himself occasionally, but also all the slide routes in the RPO game that we saw Shane Steichen use in his days at the OC in Philadelphia. If Anthony Richardson can find that level of stability we've been seeking with him, having all these young pass catchers around him to create soft box counts, along with legit threats to pull the ball, considering JT is actually very effective as a shotgun runner, we could see him turn his positive looks into chunks in a hurry. Taylor was the RB8 in average points per game in half PPR performance last year, and if you were to just take out a stupid moment of him dropping the ball just before crossing the goal line in week 15, he moves to RB5 with Joe Mixon. That's behind only Saquon, King Henry, Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson. That is the list. I have plenty of reason to believe that he'll finish in that area, yet you may get a top flight wide receiver 1 before things come back around to you in the second round and you pick JT. Second, we'll talk about rookie RJ Harvey of the Denver Broncos, currently going as RB24, 68th overall. I have him about 20 spots higher as my RB18. When Sean Payton came to Denver 2 years ago, he did not mess around, rebuilding the offensive line and prioritizing a balanced approach to the offense. Now, that didn't immediately translate into success on the ground, and that plan of attack with Russell Wilson at the helm never quite felt natural or what the old school head coach wanted it to look like. Drafting Bo Nix 12th overall and taking a lot of the responsibilities from the post-snap decision-making process away from the quarterback, combined with a dominant defense, led to them earning a playoff berth and a top 10 scoring finish. Still, Sean talked early in the offseason about adding a joker to that offense, which materialized itself in the additions of veteran tight end Evan Ingram and this second-round running back. At UCF, Harvey was a workhorse, racking up basically 3,000 yards rushing and then 500 receiving and 42 combined touchdowns over his final 2 seasons. That's not what you'd expect necessarily from a 5'8 back, listed around 190 pounds. Yet while it gives you the ability to hit those dynamic cuts, make people miss in space with crossover moves, and turn on the burners, he always played bigger than the size might indicate. The amount of times he bounce off a hit, get caught in awkward positions, yet somehow stay on his feet and keep on chugging really impressed me. Meanwhile, while his routes and hand positioning could use some refinement, he can turn a routine checkdown off screen into a big play, and at least is an invested pass protector. Now, the Broncos later on also added veteran J.K. Dobbins, who has dealt with several injuries in his career, but did look like clearly the most effective runner for the Chargers last season. He's an upgrade over Javonte Williams as the number 1 option, but he's another guy with that medical history, and just looking at how he's been able to be productive, that was always benefited from his carry total being somewhat capped as part of a 1-2 punch. So what I'm imagining here is for this to be somewhat like a 50-35-15 split, including Jaleel McLaughlin as more of a slasher, where they keep all of those guys fresh, but Harvey is the young, most dynamic of the bunch. This is working behind an O-line that is returning all 5 starters, another year together in the system, where they've already shown the willingness to diversify what they're doing from a run game design perspective. Javonte Williams was the RB38, Jaleel McLaughlin the RB54 this past season, combining for just over 13 points, but that was working with the 11th ranked run blocking unit in the NFL per PFF, which just 15% of the production came on breakaway runs, defined as carries of 15 plus yards. Moreover, dumping the ball off to the back is highly prevalent in the Sean Payton offense, as Bo Nix finished with the 3rd highest checkdown rates in the league last year, behind only Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, which for those 2 veterans felt more like a willingness to hold onto the ball. Harvey has the wheels to run by linebackers, and he's a nightmare to bring down in open space. And I know it just came out that the rookie's listed as RB5 on the current depth chart, but we've only heard rave reviews out of camp, and consider this. Sean Payton coached teams have only selected 4 running backs in the first 2 rounds. Reggie Bush, Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara, and now Harvey. 2 of those previously received over 100 targets, and all 24 guys under him have hit 50 plus. Harvey, by the way, was also a high school quarterback, and I could see a couple of trick plays with him throwing the ball mixed in. Let's not talk about a rookie from this past season, who are ranked as the RB1 in the draft cycle, but was utilized in a very limited capacity, Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. Currently going as the RB51 in the 15th-16th rounds. I have him as the RB37, just outside the top 100. Over his 2 years at Florida State, Benson turned about 350 touches into 2,300 yards and 24 touchdowns from scrimmage. At 6'1", 215 pounds, he ran a 4.39 at the combine, after already posting some impressive underlying statistics. Yet the NFL collectively decided to pass in the running back position, with the former Seminole being the second one off the board at the start of the 3rd round. With James Conner already there as a reliable workhorse in all 3 phases, chances were pretty limited for the rookie. Combining carries and targets in the pass game, Benson only received 69 opportunities. What intrigued me about the former FSU standout was his ability at that size to stick his foot on the ground and convert his momentum from horizontal to vertical movements, and hit the defensive backfield with the acceleration to just kill the second level or slide off angle tackles. The Cardinals under offensive coordinator Drew Petzing have been one of the most gap-heavy rushing attacks in the league, which doesn't necessarily play into that strength, but you do see them bring a couple of players across, and as Benson improves his patience on something like power concepts, the idea of allowing those blocks to get set up before hitting the gas is pretty alike. Otherwise, he's actually quite similar to Conner as a physical, violent runner, who in college averaged well over 4 yards per carry after contact. And even though the sample size was much smaller, of course, in his first year as a pro, he still posted a 3.33 mark, with nearly a missed tackle forced on every 4th carry. Benson was an excellent receiving back at Florida State, who can outflank linebackers with his speed to the flats, but also naturally tracks the ball when utilized down the field, and showcases excellent body control to adjust the passes placed to the wrong shoulder. As a rookie, he caught all 6 of his targets for 59 yards. What most people wouldn't recognize is that Kyler Murray was actually right there behind Bo Nix for 4th in checkdown rate last season at 13.5%. Unless Benson significantly ups his violence as a pass protector in year 2, you'd expect the veteran to take on the majority of protection work, but there's a good chance the actual receiving work does shift a little bit, as Conner caught 47 balls last year. Benson only logged at least 15 offensive snaps in 3 games last season, once running into a wall against the Rams defense in week 2 when they were blowing out those guys, before posting 12 and then 9.7 half PPR points in back-to-back weeks midway through the year. Although Petzing said earlier this offseason that Conner has earned the opportunity to be a workhorse back, when asked if the second-year man would see a larger role, he said yes and no, stating that it would depend on the game plan. Yet Conner himself said that he views him and Trey as RB1s in that offense. Right now the latter has been selected as if he was a pure handcuff. I see a pathway has some standalone value, but last year was also the first time since coming to Arizona that the veteran didn't miss multiple games, and I see this as an investment into Cardinals' run game that looked like it would roll over opponents midway through last season, where both are going too late in drafts, I believe. Here are some honorable mentions. Tyjae Spears of the Titans, someone people identified as a potential breakout candidate last year, but after dealing with multiple injuries throughout, I believe he could make a splash in his 3rd season, with a closer split to Tony Pollard. In the final 3 games, he averaged 87 yards from scrimmage and scored 4 touchdowns. Now he gets to run behind a reconfigured offensive line, with hopefully much steadier quarterback play. Unfortunately, 2 days before I'm recording this, he suffered a high ankle sprain in the preseason, but he might be an IR stash if he does end up there week 1, possibly paired with Pollard to win a pretty cheap backfield. Jerome Ford of the Browns, with the pending legal issues and NFL suspension he might be dealing with, not even having a signed his rookie deal, we don't know if 2nd round pick Quinton Judkins will even see the field at all this year. He also added Dylan Sampson in the 4th round, but even with Nick Chubb starting half the year, Ford is right there with Spears in fantasy points per game. He should lead the backfield in touches and offers some home run potential. Ray Davis of the Bills, still not knowing what's going to happen exactly with James Cook. This name is one to look at much so seriously potentially, but even if the Bills find a solution with him, Davis showed enough as a rookie to have some standalone value, while being a great handcuff for an offense that became one of the best downhill rushing attacks in the league, along with being more than a capable pass catcher. And then 2 halves at 7th round picks from this past draft, for those people in super deep leagues, or just for everyone to track. Rashard Smith of the Chiefs, a converted wide receiver who racked up nearly 1,700 yards and 18 touchdowns from scrimmage at SMU last year, has sub 4.4 speed, can change gears effortlessly, and did at least show that he's willing to run between the tackles, as someone still learning the position. The receiving back role for KC is up for grabs, and he could add some dynamism to the bangers that they already have there. And Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt of the Washington Commanders, really weird story about how he had to sit out all but last year's season opener in college due to an eligibility error, where someone else played with his number early in his career. His running style is more so herky-jerky than rhythmic, and he's very limited receiving production in college, but plenty of explosiveness, runs with a real violence, and a balanced bounce of friend and foe, could add a different element to Washington's offense, and people have hyped him up all training camp. Transitioning now to the wide receivers, and first up, another name just like Derrick Henry last year, who everybody knows already, but maybe not quite getting the attention that he deserves, and that is Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. Currently going as the wide receiver 8, 30th overall, I have him firmly inside the first round as my wide receiver 4. Whether in fantasy or real life, I believe Collins is still somewhat underrated generally. Over the last 2 years, and he actually logged less than 70% of snaps in 2023, he has averaged just over 85 receiving yards per game, and that number actually slightly went up in the playoffs against defenses where the most recent one against the Chiefs was actually by far the weakest if you look at the advanced metrics. That was played with CJ Stroud in a sensational rookie season, but then even when the quarterback and offense overall, thanks in large part to routine mishaps in protection, took a meaningful step backwards, the alpha receiver's numbers were basically identical. 2 years ago, I already highlighted Nico in this video when he wasn't even a top 50 wide receiver in fantasy drafts. The reason I bought into him at the time was my college evaluation, combined with having a healthy season as the ex-receiver in a Kyle Shanahan-style offense, and one of his disciples in Bobby Slowick, where he'd be the primary read on the majority of the passing concepts. Last year, we did see the standard wideout line up more regularly in the slot, and he came very close to his previous yards per route run mark, where he basically sits right at 3 yards per over that stretch, which rivals any receiver in the league. And still, even if we extrapolate the numbers for Nico over a 17-game season, he still would have only been on the fringe of the top 20 league-wide in terms of his team's target share. This is someone who can turn those opportunities into big plays quickly, whether stretching the field in deep post routes or running with the ball in his hands, where his acceleration and size to slide off arm tackles really pops. Yet, even though they added free agent Christian Kirk and the 2 Iowa State wide receivers on day 2 of the draft, we could see more work go to Nico just because of how incredibly efficient he's been with those looks he's gotten and the trust CJ has in him. We saw it show up more regularly on off-schedule plays last year, combining now with obviously Stephon Diggs being gone and Tank Dell probably spending most of the year on IR. And even though we don't know exactly what an Achilles scheme will look like, he's been part of Sean McVay's transformation in LA, which had its roots in the same offense as Houston previously ran, but also showed the ability to funnel targets through the top receivers, which is the same look in Achilles' background with the Patriots before that, part of why I believe he can help clean up the issues in protection, as I've previously discussed. Nico was the wide receiver 7.5 PPR points per game last year, basically right at 15 per, and other than Jamar Chase's Triple Crown season, that was only 1.3 points off the second most productive pass catcher in Justin Jefferson. That's literally 1 extra catch for 8 yards per game, if you go by half PPR scoring. Meanwhile, Jefferson is dealing with a first-year start at quarterback, Malik Neighbors may be part of a bottom 5 offense yet again, CeeDee Lamb and Puka Nacua at least have a running mate now, who'll demand more targets, and Amon-Ra St. Brown has more value in a full PPR format typically, looking at this target map. So I don't have any reason to not include Nico in my round 1 tier, and I personally take him over a couple of these names still ahead of him. Next we'll take a pretty substantial drop in regards to where this guy's been selected, with rookie Tetra McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. Currently going as the wide receiver 30, 72nd overall. I have him up as the wide receiver 22, 46th overall. This year's 8th overall pick in the actual draft was a heavily discussed, oddly divisive name in the lead-up. T-Mac racked up over 1,700 receiving yards and 18 touchdowns across 25 games these past 2 seasons combined at Arizona. So he decided to declare early as a true junior, and I thought was a pretty straightforward evaluation as my wide receiver 1, if you take a Colorado's Travis Hunter as this unicorn prospect, who had just won Heisman Trophy as a 2-way player. And yet, I was surprised to see people absolutely kill the guy for supposedly not being able to separate on a consistent basis, lacking long speed, and just not caring enough about football. That latter point was always wild to me, considering we just don't have the level of insight, and he dominated the Pac-12 competition and beyond. Now, I did believe that he needed to improve his urgency in the drive phase of the route, add to a fairly slender frame, and I hope his wide receiver coach can get a little more dog out of him still. Nonetheless, this is a big athletic wideout who can stretch the field and sky above defensive backs with his volleyball skills and insane body control to attack the ball at its highest point. Yet what really impressed me at his body composition is how he's able to step outside his frame, sort of disengages up on low half as he sets up breaks, the way he could add tilts to his routes, and generally the attention to detail before the football comes his way. He's not quite there yet, but I thought he had the potential to be the legit number 1 outside the numbers receiver in this class, who can legitimately line up on the backside of the formation and consistently win. That's exactly what the Panthers have been lacking. You look at last year's 32nd overall pick Xavier Leggett as this huge guy who lacks the refinement and needs a runway to let him go to work after the catch. Adam Thielen was the most reliable target last year, but turns 35 just before the season starts and wins in a lot of ways that you'd expect for that kind of veteran. And Jalen Coker flashed a good bit as a UDFA last year, but obviously they're less invested in him. There's nothing I see that would keep me from thinking head coach Dave Canales and quarterback Bryce Young will make it a priority to feature the rookie as the no doubt #1 option. I did a detailed breakdown of Bryce's 2024 season and the transformation he made, taking the next step in so many areas compared to what he looked like prior to getting benched. Feel free to check that out after this one. The biggest issue remaining was not having that one guy who could routinely defeat man coverage and will catch the ball consistently, even if dealing with contact. McMillan posted nearly 3 yards per route run last season, he hauled in 60% of his contested targets, and he shockingly forced 29 missed tackles across his 84 receptions. I believe he'll be a pivotal piece in the continued development of the quarterback. The offense should take another step with the entire staff coming back, and I would not be shocked if Ted caught somewhere around 80 balls for 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. That brings us to a third wide receiver, and once again it's a second-year player named Ricky Pearsall of the 49ers. Currently going as the wide receiver 44 outside the top 100, I have him as wide receiver 30, 59th overall. Someone I analyzed more extensively as part of my written piece on the second and third year breakout candidates heading into 2025. He didn't reach the same kind of heights as T-Mac did in college, but was productive pretty much straight away, catching passes for Jaden Daniels at Arizona State, and then posted 1,800 scrimmage yards across a couple of years at Florida. Pearsall was considered a potential surprise candidate at the end of the first round, but what was the less anticipated piece of the selection was that it was the 49ers who actually targeted him due to the weaponry already in place for the offense. His first year as a pro certainly didn't get off to the best start, as he was literally shot in the chest as a victim in an armed robbery before ever hitting the field. When he finally did get his chance, he played about 2/3 of his snaps over his 11 games to close out his rookie season, catching 31 passes for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, along with a couple of nice rush attempts. What probably caught Kyle Shanahan's eye was how Pearsall dusted the competition throughout Senior Bowl week as someone who loves route running specialists. Early on, when the genius play caller did try to work him into the offense, he was primarily deployed as a vertical stretch element for San Francisco. Ricky's burst from about 5 to 10 yards is something that I highlighted as part of the article that I already referenced, where he routinely put defenders on his back hip on fade routes, will actually get behind them when given releases of motion. Yet as his rookie season progressed, Pearsall will run a lot more whip and return routes, often after being put on the move, with those oily hips combined with the suddenness to change directions, along with breaking towards the middle of the field and deep in cuts off that vertical push. The reason I'm pretty confident that he'll be out there in 2 wide receiver sets for at least until Brandon Ayuk returns from tearing multiple ligaments in his knee, and there be no clear timetable on him yet, is that Pearsall looked like a fundamentally sound, effective blocker in the run game already as a rookie. What could help him edge out Joanne Jennings as well, who's currently looking for a new deal, is how he profiles as a free-level passing target for an offense that's continued to stray away from the play-action heavy approach in previous iterations to putting more responsibility on Brock Purdy as a dropback passer. He averaged nearly 28 non-play action dropbacks last season, where Ricky can run a lot of those underneath option-style routes. Meanwhile, the trade of Deebo Samuel leaves 123 combined targets and rush attempts up for grabs, and the rookie also hauled in 5 of his 9 contested opportunities, along with half of his looks of 20+ air yards to expand his usage beyond that. Considering the opportunities available for an offense that should be more balanced with the return of Christian McCaffrey, but also creates chances for the second-year receiver to run more of those deep over routes of play action like he did in college, but also help them move the chains as a quick-footed slot option, there's a path for him to lead the team in receptions, also considering he's the only guy of the names discussed today that is actually available for training camp. Ricky logged 50 offensive snaps in just 1 game last season, a fairly meaningless one on their end with the backup quarterback in place, but he did explode for 140 yards and a touchdown on 8 catches. That pace obviously isn't sustainable, but certainly better than what a low-end flex would generally provide you. Now 5 more honorable mentions here. Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals quietly finished with just under 900 yards and 8 touchdowns as a rookie, but because of where he was drafted in real life and fantasy football, combined with how inefficient Arizona was throwing the ball his way, people perceive him to have been significantly worse. In terms of wide receivers, this is still the unquestioned #1. He and Kyler Murray had another full offseason to work on the chemistry, hopefully alter his usage a little more to create these opportunities, and he comes in as a cheaper price tag this year. Calvin Ridley, once the Titans moved on from DeAndre Hopkins, Ridley was on pace for 1,300 yards if you extrapolate his numbers over full season, and that was with a combination of Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. You're drafting him a tad higher than where he finished last year, while being the more defined first option, and the potential of Cam Ward elevating his offense significantly. Rome Odunze of the Bears, another guy where the per target numbers didn't look great due to all the deep balls hitting the turf from Caleb Williams. With Chicago's interior O-line completely overhauled to provide stable protection, Ben Johnson coming in as a premier play caller to just install sound passing concepts and more creativity. Odunze being such a complete route runner coming out of college as a top 10 pick, with a contested catch rate of over 70% as a rookie, he could make a big jump as the most reliable receiver on the team. Kyle Williams of the Patriots started to get a lot more attention late in the draft process, when I'd already been hyping him up for roasting corners throughout Senior Bowl week. He was an older prospect coming out of Washington State, but showed that he can win from multiple spots, has that instant acceleration, wins the ball in the air, and then pulls away from everyone. Stephon Diggs probably leads New England catches, but this guy might be tops in yardage. Finally, Josh Palmer might be that X receiver the Bills were trying to create as an amalgamation between Mac Hollins and rookie Keon Coleman, has done a lot more damage down the field for the Chargers than most people recognize, can stay on the field for those two wide receiver packages, went to a load up and maybe take shots of play action for a high scoring offense without a target hog in the passing game. Let's now transition to the tight ends, which is the point where I might lose many of the viewers here when I tell you to seriously consider targeting Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons in the draft. Currently going as the tight end 17, 136th overall. I have him 4 spots higher in my overall tight ends rankings and 107th overall. Long-time viewers of the channel will remember that I did highlight him already 2 years ago when he was going as tight end 5, coming off an injury-riddled second season, following a spectacular rookie debut, and since then he simply burned fantasy managers to the ground, or at least played with the heads like a roller coaster. After setting a new rookie record in receiving yards by tight end, which has since been surpassed by Brock Bowers, in 32 active and fantasy-relevant games since that point, Pitts has posted 10 weeks with double-digit points, but 17 in which he was limited to 5 or fewer and half PPR scoring. Sure, a lot of the success at this position is about if your guy scored a touchdown or not, but having a goose egg can also cost you your matchups, so we need more consistency from him, and that's not really up for debate. Pitts was labeled as a unicorn prospect, with his combination of height, speed, ball skills and movement ability to be a weapon from multiple alignments. He had some stupid plays as a junior at Florida before getting picked 4th overall, and we saw that versatility as a rookie especially, with over 34% of his snaps coming out wide, as Atlanta's de facto X receiver to a large degree. After that, he became more of a big slot under Arthur Smith, before playing a career high percentage at over 38% in line in his new iteration of the Zach Robinson offense in Atlanta. Across that entire time, he was catching passes from Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, and Desmond Ridder, before the combination of Kirk Cousins ultimately getting benched for rookie Michael Penix Jr. this past season. The ball placements, down the field especially, was horrendous at times, and he hasn't been able to come anywhere close to a success in contested situations because he wasn't allowed to use his frame in an advantageous way. Looking at some different numbers in this new scheme, Pitts last season had the 12th highest share of the team's air yardage among tight ends, and he was right there for the standard at the position by his primary receiving guys like Brock Bowers, Mark Andrews, George Kittle and others at 3.5 yards on average. He was only provided 3 catchable passes of 20 plus air yards, but did secure 2 of those, while his QBs just tossed the ball into the hands of the defender once more than that. That could look quite different now with a switch of quarterback. Atlanta last season had 26 votes labeled as these deep completions overall. Penix alone had 7 of those across those final 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Pitts actually just had his most impressive campaign after the catch, forcing 10 missed tackles and averaging 5.8 extra yards every time once the ball had hit his hands. This was the time 18 at just 6.6 yards per game last year, so basically what we're asking here from Pitts, in order to live up to where he's been drafted, is to just be the exact same player, and that was playing through a foot injury all year, with a quarterback in Kirk Cousins who ended up looking unplayable after the first half of the season, before ultimately getting benched for rookie Michael Penix Jr. in those final 3 weeks. Through his first 10 games, Pitts had just over 8.3 points on average. That would have placed him as tight end 10, and I know it doesn't quite work that way, but I can also very much envision a world in which he's a more involved piece of the offense, in a role that is more suitable to his skill set. So as a high upside number 2, maybe pairing with a more floor-based option to position, I like that a lot. That brings us to the third player who also made my list of young breakout candidates for 2025, and that is Brenton Strange of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Currently barely being drafted as the tight end 26 outside the top 200. I have him all the way up there tight end 14, so just behind Pitts, 110th overall. Someone who received a lot of late buzz leading up to the 2023 NFL draft, yet as a rookie he just caught 5 passes as a primary block and tight end. This past season, however, he displayed more impressive receiving skills, along with putting in quality work in the run game, hauling in 40 passes for over 400 yards and a pair of touchdowns as a part-time starter, with Aaron Ingram missing some time to injury. Despite of how productive the veteran tight end had been in Jacksonville, they allowed him to walk in free agency due to what they knew they had in store. At Penn State, Strange primarily stood out to me with his ability to put his hand in the dirt and legitimately create movement at the point of attack and run concepts. Once again, I talked about that in more detail when writing about him as a name to break out this year, if you want to read up about him in more detail, but this team is curious that he can be a fixture in 11 personnel. He'd also be off the line of scrimmage when they slide him underneath the formation or have him run deep overs off play action. That's especially important considering they had Liam Cohen to implement this offense, which just finished top 6 in both DVOA and EP per play last season, while doing plenty of damage off the run fake. Going through his 2024 film, I thought there were numerous occasions where Strange gained a couple of steps on linebackers or safeties trying to play flat-footed on benders, corner routes, and others with the speed he can build up. Yet he shows that strength to nudge off guys when they're in tight coverage, he's able to shield and absorb force with his large frame over the middle of the field, and then this is a no-nonsense guy after the catch, where he can stop and start his defenders coming too hot, but his ability to throw by would-be tacklers, spin out of the grasp, or just put his pads down to run through contact, he's not someone you want to get in the way of. Last year, he forced 9 missed tackles on just 40 catches. Overall, he was all the way down at tight end 35, at just under 4 half PPR fantasy points per game, but that was still Moses' designated blocker, clearly behind Evan Ingram in the pecking order for targets. If you just look at the 10 games in which he was officially listed as the starter, that number was up to about 5.7, which would elevate him 10 spots, and that alone would pay off his ADP. That was without him settling into the somewhat new role, not always having Trevor Lawrence throw him the football, in an offense that struggled to get into and convert in scoring range. I have faith in Cohen constructing an attack with better spacing and ideas in both the run and pass game, while having already helped Kate Otten beat the tight end 13 in fantasy points per game last year, despite a couple of horrendous opening weeks. And Strange to me is significantly more talented. A few more names to just keep on your radar, the first one being pretty well known, Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys. Last season was a lot worse for him actually than I'd even remembered in totality, as the numbers were down significantly without Dak Prescott at the helm. The year before, he was a top 10 tight end, and fumbling had previously never been an issue for him like it was last year. Dak loves to throw the seam ball, Fergie can go up and get it, and he shrugs off plenty of attempted tackles. But then 2 really deep cuts, maybe the best considerations, or just keep them in mind for those really big leagues. Jatavian Sanders of the Panthers, he had a stretch in the middle of his rookie season where he caught 21 passes for 261 yards across 6 games, before suffering a neck injury that seemed to bother him the rest of the way. Already led the tight end group in targets and catches, with the ascent of Bryce Young and the offense overall. I think this guy's change of direction before and after the catch will bring a notable element. And lastly, Terrence Ferguson, a rookie this year for the Rams, who they traded out of the first round and made this guy the priority when they got onto the clock. Sean McVay said himself that we'll get a lot more 12 personnel for them, meaning Ferguson will stay on the field even once Tyler Higbee returns from injury. Good speed, has a natural feel as a separator, can nudge off guys, and tracks the ball well. He might end up as the number 3 target, behind only Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. Now let's quickly run through 3 defenses. And the ADPs for all of these are kinda all over the place because different platforms have different numbers or rounds. You have people leaving and auto-drafting, etc. But just a general idea here. First with the Houston Texans, they were the number 8 defense in the league last season, which they're going as right now, and they were 1 strip stick away from being tied for 5th. The issue with them from a fantasy perspective is that it was so all or nothing scoring wise. They had 15 plus points in 4 weeks, but 3 or less in 7 others. They have an elite 2 of edge rushers between Will Anderson Jr. and Daniel Hunter to bring over CJ Gardner-Johnson to add him to a secondary, with plenty of guys already who can come down with the ball themselves. And if the offense can put a little more pressure on opponents again to keep up the scoring, we'll see all those guys feast. The Seattle Seahawks, currently going as the defense 13, mentioning the defense 5 from a year ago, that actually was Seattle. Now similarly, there was more volatility with them compared to some of the other top tier units. They finished with more than 10 points 6 times, but they also had 1 or 2 points on 4 occasions. Year 2 of Mike McDonald bringing that unit together, the improvement they already showed this past season, now hopefully having a healthier Chandler Nwosu, and Byron Murphy looking at second year lead potentially. And they're facing a pretty soft schedule offensively, with Washington being the only group that ranked inside the top 10 scoring wise last year. And lastly, the Los Angeles Rams, another NFC West team whose defense isn't receiving the recognition it deserves. I have more questions personnel wise in the back 7 for sure with LA, but their front has a chance to be truly dominant this year. Jared Verse coming off a defensive rookie of the year season, Braden Fisk was a contender in that race for a while, Kobe Turner and Byron Young were for stretches the year prior, and now they added Poona Ford at the nose to help stop the run early, to get into those longer downs so they can pin their ears back. Chris Schuler is back for his second year as the DC, and Cam Kinchen's ball hawking skills should be on display for the full season. taking advantage of some errant throws. These guys were already tied for 10th with Detroit in fantasy scoring in 2024, yet one of them is being slated to start in all leagues despite losing their coordinator, while the other one basically goes undrafted in all standard sized ones. Just to quickly recap the names we've talked about today: quarterbacks Justin Fields and Drake May, two dual threat quarterbacks who could be fantasy cheat codes if the offensive play callers really tap into the skill sets as designed runners and have a higher floor than they're being credited for. Running backs Jonathan Taylor, RJ Harvey, and Trey Benson, a potential league winner at fringe RB1 cost, Sean Payton's second round rookie counted at a discount due to the murkiness of Denver's backfield, and a second year guy who, even as a pure handcuff, is probably underrated and might be more than that even if the star was healthy all year long. Wide receivers Nico Collins, Tetro McMillan, and Ricky Pearsall, a superstar receiver who isn't quite viewed that way yet, but I believe will return round 1 production, a rookie with a clear path for being the alpha in an offense that should continue to ascend, and a second year guy who has the opportunity to stand out in an offense bound to bounce back in a real way. Two tight ends, Kyle Pitts and Brandon Strange, a talent where everyone who's owned him over the last few years is totally out on, but comes with the discount involved and plenty of boom potential, along with someone finally becoming a full-time starter who really impressed me in his previously limited capacity with a massive upgraded play caller. And in the three defenses, Houston Texans, Seattle Seahawks, and LA Rams, just 3 units were all underrated in the perception of most fans. That brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed me diving into the fantasy world once again this year. There's plenty of quality, but also kind of garbage clickbait content out there in the space, but I've had a lot of success allowing my more general football thoughts to lead me in my drafts and as a bettor. If you found this helpful or at least informative, I would really appreciate any support. Like the video, subscribe if it's your first time here, and you can follow me on social media. All of those links are down below. As you go to the comment section, let me know what you think of the list. Maybe throw out a couple of names you're really high on and will be targeting yourself. Would love to hear your thoughts. I just released my personal NFL Top 100 list last week, which I'm sure as I record this a little in advance, will be well received by everyone. You can check that out. Not exactly sure what I'll be posting next week. Might be another video on something happening in the preseason. Before we get into my full season predictions, all the major awards, playoff teams, and who I've got competing for the Super Bowl. For now, I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys and getting ready for kickoff. So until then, see you later. Peace!